Sometimes we are asked to recommend tapes for beginners. Now, actually, you won't have any beginners ever come to the Infinite Way, because anyone who has been led to this message is already something more than a beginner. And I think that it would be well to do away with the use of that word beginner, whether in reference to tapes, books, or classes. Let's not have any beginners classes, let's not have any beginners books or beginners tapes. But let us change that to this. We will have basic tapes or classes in basic Infinite Way, tapes in basic Infinite Way, books of basic Infinite Way. In other words, those that are absolutely foundational. Because a very grave question comes up that I can assure you from my experience does more to prevent students' progress than any other one thing. Everyone wants the most advanced teaching they can get, and very few are interested in having a foundation. There are students, and I mean in big numbers, who want to be in practitioners' classes who have never had a closed class. There are people who have only read one Infinite Way book who write to me for which is the most advanced books and the most advanced tapes. And they believe that they're capable of digesting them, of assimilating them. They're not. They never will be anything but time wasters. Right? Because it is just as true in studying a mystical message as it is in studying mathematics, grammar. Without the foundational points, you cannot achieve the mastery of the subject. And we have far too many dabblers in the arts and sciences as well as in the spiritual life, and in the spiritual life more than in any other. Nobody seems to have a feeling that foundational work is necessary. Just give them illumination or initiation, because that is what they are seeking. And so it is that very often it is necessary for me in the monthly letters to remind students that no one is going to advance in the Infinite Way without the foundational points. But on the other hand, no advanced student is going to succeed unless they keep going back to the foundational points. Now, it may be that, as usual, I am only speaking from my experience, but I do know that it is my experience that I have to occasionally remind myself that I'm not going to God to get a power. I have to remind myself once in a while that I'm not seeking any God to do anything to error, and I don't know how anyone else gets so advanced that they can get beyond that. So I believe that when we recommend living the Infinite Way, practicing the presence and the art of meditation and the art of spiritual healing, we should do it from the standpoint that these are the books that contain the basic, the foundational points on which the mysticism of the infinite way is built, and without which the mysticism of the infinite way will never be understood. In the same way, in the use of tapes and in the recommendation of tapes, we should speak always of those tapes that have the basic or foundational points of the infinite way on which its mysticism and healing consciousness is based. In other words, what we mean by the mystical message is the development of the healing consciousness or the Christ consciousness. But there is no way to develop that without the basic points. And the thing that has prevented many, many great spiritual leaders from attaining Christ consciousness is the fact that they know all about I and the Father are one, and they know all about the Spirit of God, but they are still knowing two powers, and they are still thinking of God in terms of over-error, and they are still thinking in terms of using God, or praying to God and letting God be their messenger. Now, until a student has really ruled out of consciousness that you are going to get God to be your messenger boy and go out and do something for you, you cannot have the healing consciousness. Therefore, the basic and foundational tapes and books are essential for the development of spiritual consciousness. And among the tapes, we can recommend all of the San Diego tapes, Toronto, Canada, Holland, Lausanne, Switzerland, Grand Rapids, Santa Barbara, and the Denver practitioner class. All of these, you may safely say, contain basic foundational points, and the use of these and the application of these to daily human problems. Not the use of God and not the application of God, but the use and application of specific principles to the problems of everyday living. And they are all embodied in these tapes. To you who are hearing these tapes out in the world, the noise that you hear on this tape and probably on some of the others of this series is the rain. We are having a rainfall in Hawaii and have been having it for several weeks, and therefore a lot of our tapes will have the rainfall on them, which you may mistakenly believe to be some defect or other. It isn't. It's just what we out here call liquid sunshine. That is our term for rain out here, liquid sunshine. And most of the time it is, but not today. Then, in conducting classes, you can have classes on basic and foundational infinite way, and you could have another series on living the principles, living and applying the principles of the infinite way, and then later the mysticism of the infinite way. In the mysticism of the infinite way, you will require the contemplative life, which might well be the first book to take, because it gently leads through contemplation into the deeper meditation. Thunder of Silence And the thunder of silence would have to be divided into its three parts in teaching, so that each part is taught separately. And the third and final part, the Sermon on the Mount, should be, of course, a class entirely by itself, because these chapters, the Sermon on the Mount, really contain the height of mysticism. And then from there, you would go into the parenthesis in eternity. And here, too, you would have to take them in their separate parts, because you find that they graduate. They go up in a very gentle upward slope or slant. And when you get into the parenthesis in eternity, you are getting into a teaching that has never before been explained, revealed as it is there. Now, on the subject of reincarnation, it isn't wise to go into this subject separate and apart from those chapters, but those who are interested, you could recommend the book Reincarnation, published by the Julian Press in New York City, because this takes up the subject of reincarnation in the fullest and most complete way that has ever been done in the history of the world in a book. And it presents it from the standpoint of both the East and the West, and anyone can get out of it whatever they're capable of receiving, far better than we could explain it without the great authorities that they have. With us, explaining it would be personal opinion, and here they have authority. But that which we are imparting as a part of the mysticism of the infinite way, and which is so important to us, is that part of the subject covered by the parenthesis in eternity. And the reason is this: if you can understand that the period from our conception until the grave is a parenthesis, you can understand, a parenthesis in eternity. And of course you illustrate eternity with a ring and show the parenthesis covering a quarter of the ring, and another parenthesis, another quarter, another parenthesis, so that supposing you start with the second parenthesis where we are now, and show that there must have been a parenthesis before into which we have come, or else you have no authority for saying that you will leave this parenthesis to enter another one. You would have to say, well, if there was no one before, why should we believe there is one afterward? If we began, why don't we end? Therefore, it has to be clear that there was a parenthesis before this one. And on this basis, you can understand some of the things that have happened to you in this life. Before we come to that, let's go to the one after this. What is going to happen to us in the next parenthesis? Are we going to be born in a slave country, if there are any left on earth? Are we going to be born in a poverty-stricken country? Are we going to be born, is there any possibility of our being born into adverse circumstances? And the only answer is, the treasures that we lay up in this parenthesis is what we will carry into the next parenthesis. In other words, you know right well you won't carry your wealth with you. no matter how much it may be, how great it may be. You know you're not carrying this body with you. You know that you are not carrying your property with you. You are not carrying your family with you. You are going alone. And the only thing you can carry with you is what has been stored up in your consciousness. And therefore, if you have laid up flesh, lust, ambition, greed, selfishness, that is what you must carry with you into your next parenthesis. The Orientals call this karma, the Hindus. But the Christians call it, as ye sow, so shall ye reap. And they are warned that this carries over into the next life, where it is given them, lay up for yourselves treasures in heaven. Because that's what will greet you in your next parenthesis. Now, that behooves us as students to give all that we can to our studies, to our meditations, to the practice of these principles, so that we can feel that when we leave here, and whenever that may be, that at least we will carry with us that which will be a foundation for a new start. Now, this will likewise explain to you some of the good and some of the evil that has happened to you in this parenthesis, because you are carrying with you here some of what you laid up to bring across, whether it was the flesh or the spirit. It is erroneously believed that inheritance has something to do with it, that we have suffered for the sins of our parents, or that we benefit by their progress. But I can assure you this is not so. That even if you are born into their wealth, that it isn't because of them, it's because of your consciousness. Even if you have healthy parents and you have health, you didn't inherit their health, you brought with you their health. There are lots of healthy parents who have sick children. There are lots of sick parents who have healthy children. So that, be assured of this, the ancient Hebrews were right when they said, each one makes his own life, takes the responsibility. It is not that the sins of the fathers are visited on the children unto the third and fourth generation, but that each individual brings their own life, their own stored up consciousness. Now, when you make this clear, and don't try to make it clear to those to whom you are teaching basic, because it is far beyond their ability to grasp. But when you are revealing this to them, no sentiment, no emotion should be allowed to sway you from giving the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. You are responsible for your life. Not your parents, not your surroundings. I don't have as many teenagers come to me as one would imagine. I guess I don't draw them. But the few that do, I try to make that point clear. And I try to get them to read biographies and autobiographies and look at the background of Einstein, of Theodore Roosevelt, a consumptive at 12 years of age, not expected to live, of Eddie Cantor, of Irving Berlin, of Henry Ford, of Steinmetz, born an absolute cripple, completely deformed, a really physical misfit, who became the greatest of the great. And many others that each one of us knows, so that it is implanted in them that we make or unmake our own lives. And it is by what is in us. If it isn't in us, we can't make it. We'll just be a victim of our own nothingness. If it is in us, nothing in this world can keep us from it. I have mentioned Jesus Christ, the Hebrew rabbi who was the head of the Christian religion. Seems impossible, doesn't it? But it's happened. So it is then that we are the product of what is within us, and if we glimpse that, we can then go on and develop it. If we do not glimpse that, in our ignorance, we will just live out our whole lifespan bemoaning our fate and blaming someone else for it. Now, we have infinite capacity because God is really the self of us. Therefore, through meditation, and only through meditation, and only through meditation, and only through meditation, can we make immediate contact and conscious oneness with that source and draw on its infinity. If the infinite way gave nothing but meditation to the Western world, it would have a tremendous achievement, but it is giving far more than that. Now, once we can draw on our source, there is no handicap in our experience that we cannot overcome. But the point is, there must be that desire. Otherwise, it cannot be. You know as well as I do that Alcoholics Anonymous has blessed many, many, many people, but there are loads who have not benefited by it, who have tried it, because the will to overcome it wasn't there. That inner drive, that inner capacity to want to achieve it. And so it is that we have plenty of students in the Infinite Way who go no further than being healed or trying to get on a platform to display their ego. Now, if you can impart to the student that there is no limit to their spiritual capacity, even out of the full Christhood, those in whom it awakens a spark will go on from there and give it all that they've got in order to attain it. However, whatever degree they do store up here, this is the degree that is carried into the next incarnation, or next, we won't use the word incarnation, we will use the word parenthesis. But it is an incarnation. Even if they do not return here to earth, they're still incarnating as a living being, wherever or whatever circumstance. But we will call it a parenthesis because it may be lived here or it may not be lived here. So it is that through this, the parent develops a greater responsibility toward their children, because they understand now that the greater the spiritual impartation they can give the child, the greater the treasure they are giving it, far more than the dollars they're going to leave it. or give it, far more than the education they're going to give it, is the spiritual treasure that can be laid up. But in this higher work, it must be made clear that we go from parenthesis to parenthesis, parenthesis to parenthesis, until through higher spiritual attainments the parenthesis gets weaker and weaker and weaker until it fades out. And then we are living the eternity. We are no longer living the parenthesis, we are living the eternity, and yet each one maintaining unto the end of time his individuality. It is not an absorption into deity. We have, each one of us, an individuality, that is, some individual mode and form of expression. We will have that unto the, well, there will never come a time when we will be without it, because we were created with it. And that is our permanent identity. We may be a male in one incarnation and a female in another, depending on what our purpose is in incarnating, what the reason is. But it will always be I. Always I in my own identity. Always I will be looking out of here, and whether this form seems to be a male form or a female form or a neuter form, if there ever is going to be one, whatever it is, I will always be I. And the reason is that when I was formed in the bosom of the Father in the beginning, it was as an individual expression of that infinity. Only on the basis of this parenthesis does life have a meaning. In other words, it tells me why I am an infinite way work. It doesn't make a mockery or an accident out of life and say, no, you were born like everybody else and opportunity came, or you made an opportunity, or you were favored of God. Or no, it shows me that I must be an unfolding, a progressively unfolding state of consciousness, and that I must have been somewhere or other on this path and evolved toward this point. And I can tell you that throughout my entire life, even as a child, I knew that life was evolutionary, because in New York City, where I was born and brought up, there was a great deal of talk of the revolutionary side, because it was in New York that the first great strikes took place in the ready-to-wear industry, and where we saw the effects of clubs and brass knuckles in bringing order into it, and that it was accomplished not by an evolutionary process, but by a revolutionary process. Just as with the miners in Pennsylvania under Lewis, there was no evolutionary process there, it was a revolutionary process. And just as with the Negro, the Civil War was the greatest failure that mankind has ever known, because it is the one war that was supposed to be based on man's freedom and equality, and it never accomplished either of those things. It has been said that Abraham Lincoln failed in 29 events of his life and then succeeded in becoming president. But in order to make his 30 complete, he failed as a president, because he gave us a war without an excuse, rhyme, or reason, that never had a possibility to succeed, and it didn't succeed. And so giving the Negro freedom by revolutionary means or rebellious means or war means was a failure. It couldn't happen. And so now it is taking place more through evolution, even though some misguided people are reverting to the revolutionary. Now, these attempts that are being made in the Southland, in Mississippi and in Alabama, are the revolutionary methods. They cannot succeed in anything but hard feelings, because as long as the present generation is on earth, those whites will hate the blacks and the blacks will hate the whites. So that whatever integration will only come with future generations through evolution, not through this revolution. And all of this could be accomplished without these fights and strikes and battles. But the consciousness of these people isn't ready to understand an evolutionary process of life. We have witnessed this, those of us who are New Yorkers, in watching immigration. In New York City, of course, was the great immigration of the early days. And the people came from Ireland, and the people came from Middle Europe, and the people came from Russia. And I can tell you, they were sad, sad people, in sad, sad plights. And that first generation weren't always the ideal people. But when you stop now to see their children and their children's children, and see how they have integrated, how they are no longer German Americans or Russian Americans or Irish Americans, they are just Americans, whereas the first generation wouldn't acknowledge that. We had Irish American societies, Holland American societies, and so forth and so on. Not now. The children and the grandchildren are integrated by virtue of the public school system. So you see that if you are patient with evolution, you will witness divine harmony. If you engage in revolution, now, you will still have to wait for the coming generations before things get straightened out. And so it is with us individually. We have evolved. If it weren't for that, you would have to ask yourself, why did some of these people migrate to the United States and the others stay at home? Why didn't they all migrate? In the old days, they could have. We had open immigration for the European side, not the Oriental side. And so everybody in Russia could have migrated. Every Jew in Germany could have migrated. Every poverty-stricken farmer in Ireland could have. Why not? Consciousness was not prepared for the experience, you see. And so it is that those only who had evolved to that point where they could go on migrated. Well, in later years we have the same from the Orient, and we have an even greater example of it because the law has been so strict and the amount allowed in immigration so few that you can say, well, the few that did come had something that enabled them to pick up their beds and walk. On no other basis than the parenthesis can you account for what is happening to us and to the people of this world. And as you see some walk through life without becoming victims of its injustices and inequalities, and when you see others that never seem to rise, you know it is something within themselves, especially when you see how some in the very finest of families who can give the best of culture, education, example, there are still the black sheep. Then you must see that it is actually what is in that individual. I am making a large point of that at this point for this reason, that for the student who is ready for it, this is one of the most important subjects of all, because while he cannot overcome the handicaps of his past parenthesis, he can't go back and do it over again there, he can start and do it over again here. Because it is foolish for a person of any age not to look squarely in the face that someday I will be marching on to another experience. It is inevitable. I don't care if they're only 18 now, they should face the fact that the day is coming when they too will give place to another generation and another generation, another one, and they will have to march on to another experience. And that what they lay up, the treasures they lay up for themselves of a spiritual, cultural, educational nature, is the enlightenment they will carry with them into the next. To most people, it will be of no interest. Well, we'll take care of that when the time comes. But there will be the remnant of those ready to hear it, respond to it, and do something about it. Then, there is an essential point that has to be brought out after a student has been with you, not any particular amount of months, but for a long enough time for you to see that the time has come for them to realize it. You must realize that one of the principles of the infinite way is in the revelation that we already embody infinity, and that we must open out a way for the imprisoned splendor to escape. Now, this is a complete reversal of the human picture, in spite of the fact that the word educate means to draw forth, not to stuff in. Education is still a stuffing in process, whereas the word actually means to draw out that which is already within. In other words, you can draw out from a person the integrity that they have, but you can't pump it into them. You can draw out a musical skill, but you cannot pump it into them. You can draw out of them an artistic appreciation or ability, but you cannot pump it into them. If they haven't got it, they won't get it. Therefore, our premise is that God constitutes our individual being. Therefore, all that the Father hath is mine. Now, I know that when our students read that statement, they're always thinking that all the supply that the Father hath is theirs, and that usually means money. But that isn't its meaning at all. All that the Father hath is mine. All of the capacity, all of the qualities, all of the quantities, all of the character, the nature, the disposition, all that constitutes God, I have. Now, there is no use of trying to add those things to me. The point is to draw them out. And therefore, we come in our work to the givingness of life. Unless we can bring out in the student this givingness of life, they have no chance for a happy marriage, because there are no happy physical marriages. There are some that last a lifetime, but one or the other or both are just tolerating it. There are no happy human marriages. There never has been one, and there never can be one. For more reasons than one. But there can be happy marriages on earth among humans, but only in proportion as each one realizes that they are giving to the marriage, and that what they are giving is what they're going to get back, and no more. So that you eventually get to forget what you expect from the other and commence to wonder, am I giving sufficiently? Am I contributing enough of whatever it is? Now, it applies to marriage, but it applies to business. Nobody is going to get any more out of their job than they put in, but everybody complains that they have the wrong boss or the inappreciative superior. But that's all nonsense. If there is anything that any firm is looking for, it's talent and ability, because that's what they make their money on. Ambition, work, something. And so it is that we get out of business what we put in. Therefore, our business life has to be a givingness. Then in every department of our life, the lesson of givingness must be taught, and that begins somewhere after the student has been with you 6 months, 4 months, 8 months, a year. With each one it'll be different, because each one is not ready in the same period of time. They don't all develop in the same length of time. But remember that it is one of the major subjects, because without reversing the human picture, it isn't. And right here we have a tape that conveys this lesson. It is the 1958 London Open, Reel 1, and the subject is self-surrender. In imparting the higher work, the more advanced work, and the mystical work, please remember this, that you will notice, both on tapes and in the books, that regardless of how high the message goes, it always brings you back to earth by inserting some of the basic principles of the letter of truth. And the reason is that it is absolutely impossible to live the mystical life without the conscious remembrance of the basic foundational points on which it is built. Because without this, we become clouds without rain, or we become mystics separate and apart from the activity of the world, the practicality of the world, and we become dreamers. Now, to my sense, to be a dreamer is the most ideal state of being. If the dreamer always remembers the foundation on which the dream is built and the reason for his dreaming, he is only dreaming in order to make this life a better one, a more spiritual one, not humanly better, but bringing the spiritual dreams into the daily experience. In other words, as I see the mission of the Infinite Way, it is that the Word become flesh. That is, that the state of mystical consciousness that we attain become the degree of harmony in our daily life. In my own life, I do not separate these at all. I make always every mystical principle apply to my daily living. In other words, these spiritual principles must enable me, if I have a business, to have a better business. If I have an art or profession, to be better at it. If I'm investing my capital, I must have better guidance in investing it because of this. In other words, every bit of my spiritual approach must help me, even in my benevolences. It is my dreams that must be fulfilled on earth. And if I cannot dream of what it means to give others spiritual and educational and artistic enlightenment, then I will not be guided to provide financially for these. But because in my dreams, my visions, I see the marvels of education, of music, of art, I manage to contribute money every year to those activities, so that my dreams are made practical by providing these things, as well as providing bread and butter for those who haven't bread and butter. But I would not consider my life fulfilled if I gave all of my benevolences to buying food and clothing and housing for people, because I would feel that after they had them, what have they got? So it is with a community. Even if a community has enough industries to provide it with wealth, what kind of a community is it if it hasn't an orchestra, or if it hasn't an art gallery, or if it hasn't something of artistic as well as spiritual value? And therefore, it is the dreamer who is more apt to support the practical aspects of life, because he knows that there is no practicality in bread alone. Every teacher and practitioner should remember this, that there is no disgrace in not knowing something, because none of us knows everything. And therefore, when students ask questions, if you do not know the answer, be honest enough to say, I would rather look it up and get more information on it before I take up this subject, or this is a subject that I do not care to take up because I do not feel that it is a part of my work. It is in the same way that you'll notice in all my classes, whenever questions have come up about the afterlife or spiritualism or reincarnation, I have said I do not care to discuss those subjects in class. And I also do not discuss them privately, except where the individual has come to some that measure and have made their own attempt by at least getting all the information they can. Don't expect me to give them what's in that book on reincarnation. Don't expect me to give them what they can find on spiritualism in the books. That's their function. If there's anything beyond that, they ask and I have the answer, then I will give it. But never, never hesitate. If you're not certain, do not answer. It is better not to answer than to mislead. And there is no disgrace in saying, I don't know everything that's to be known. Again, when the question is on something to do with the message of the infinite way, be very careful not to answer a question, unless you are so thoroughly familiar with the writings on that subject that you know right well they cannot come back at you afterward and say, well, you didn't know what you were talking about, you should have read the books more. In other words, you will hold your dignity more by saying, let's take that up next week or the week after, and then speaking authoritatively than just speaking out quickly for the sake of giving an answer, and then having your student find out how clay feet you've got that you didn't even know your books. Another question that comes up. You will be asked over and over and over again, shall I take medicines? Shall I go to the doctor? Now, number one, your patient or student has a family, and you have no right to offer any advice that would antagonize their family or their family life. Therefore, You should never advise whether or not they should go to the doctor or have an operation. You should say that is something that has to be resolved between you and your family. You must keep peace with your family, even if it is a suffer it to be so now. And you must take the attitude that since there is no evil, there can be no evil consequences. In other words, there are those in metaphysics who are superstitious and believe that if they take an aspirin, God will punish them, or if they have an operation, God will punish them. But we who have been in it have found that we wear eyeglasses, and others wear earphones, and others wear arch supports, and God hasn't punished us for it. So that it is folly to separate one branch of metaphysics, materia medica, and say, yes, go to a dentist or wear eyeglasses, but don't do the other. In other words, all of these are suffer it to be so now. And our goal is to become free, not by repression, not by suppression, but by spiritual enlightenment. When the Christ touches consciousness, you will be freed of smoking or drinking or whatever it may be that is bothering you. And when you are sufficiently touched by the Christ, you will be freed of any reliance, or more and more freed of reliance on material means. Therefore, you do not set yourself up as a judge and tell your patients what they should do, because if they have a broken bone, they can't walk on their leg without crutches. Now, what's the use of fooling yourself? They can't do it. If you could rise high enough to give them an instantaneous healing so that they could, and you could say, rise, pick up thy bed and walk, all right. But otherwise, don't tell them not to use crutches. And therefore, if they have diabetes and they have to take insulin for the time being, or they have heart trouble and they have to take digitalis, or if they have something else, let them alone and keep giving them help. The time will come when you yourself will know whether they're just using truth as a crutch. Then is the time for you to drop it and say, no, you're not really making the effort to go this way, and I have others who are. But otherwise, do not intrude into that family life or their personal life, but tell them to work it out, and you will work with them for their freedom. If that freedom isn't attained and you see they're not really trying hard enough, then you can break away. You must from time to time check on your students as to the amount of reading or the amount of meditation or so forth that they are doing, because otherwise you just become, you let them become a vampire, just sucking everything out of you while they themselves contribute nothing of themselves. And you cannot have that relationship with people, because they are the ones who can sap you. I have noticed in my work, I am never sapped by teaching those where there is a flow, those who are yielding and responding and giving, studying, meditating, you see. But the moment I'm up against a person who's got a wall up here and they're just letting me pump it out, I get depleted to some extent. I can feel that there's a reaction. Right? And the reason is that they're not giving me back what I'm giving out to them. There's no flow going on. But when you drink this in and then go out and practice and meditate and read, and you're giving me a flow while you're sitting here. See that? It's back and forth. We are two or more gathered together. We're not just a vine feeding a lot of vampire vines. Right? Even while the teacher and practitioner is teaching the student and patient the givingness of life and the place that gratitude has and so forth, neither the practitioner nor the student should ever allow themselves in their own consciousness to be in a place of doing this for the purpose of getting. Otherwise, they will sacrifice the consciousness which they have built, that I and my Father are one, and all that the Father hath is mine. Because it gets too easy in the religious world and the metaphysical world to accept from patients and students and unconsciously lapse into the belief that, oh, well, the laborer is worthy of his hire, or, oh, well, you are contributing to this activity. As a matter of fact, God is supporting this activity, and if I forget it, I lose it. And if I ever think that the students are supporting this activity, even if sometimes I say whatever contribution you make goes to the support of the activity, I can't believe it. Firstly, because I've seen how many years there were no students contributing to the activity, and the activity went on. And all over the world where they weren't accustomed to contributing and where they had no money to contribute, and it still went on. And I know the reason, only because I know the I, and only because when I accept, and of course, probably you've already had the experience that students are very generous. Not every one. They haven't grown to that. But there are those. So that there is a generous income. But within myself, if I looked for it or expected it or thought it was part of my demonstration, that's where it would be lost. I must always maintain within myself the realization that I and the Father are one, and all the Father hath is mine, and let it come from the directions through which it will come. And several times it has come through inheritances from students who said nothing about it at the time, but when their will was read, there it was. You never know the ways that God has to fulfill His own function and so forth. So that even in teaching givingness, be watchful that you don't fall into the religious attitude of believing that if you're grateful, God will bless you, and my supply comes from your gratitude. No. Now, I and my Father are one. Without this, we will not learn the bigger lesson, which is this. In the course of our experiences, we always accumulate more than we have an immediate need for. And this goes into savings or investments, and sometimes we think of it as what we will leave to our families and so forth. But the fallacy of that for us is that the human scene can change so quickly that everything we have today could be wiped out tomorrow. And unless we ourselves were in the consciousness that manna falls day by day, I and the Father are one today, regardless of what happened yesterday, we would be in a sad fix. And so it is that while we're not expecting such things, we are prepared for whatever may happen in human experience, because now I and the Father are one. In the same way that today we all have a certain amount of protection because there is a police department and an army and a navy. But in many countries, the police department and the army and the navy turn against the people. And then you see what happens to them when there's a revolution or rebellion, and the soldiers start shooting down the people, the very soldiers that were paid by the people. So that if you were looking to your protection in that direction, you'd have no protection. So your only protection has to be that I am hid with Christ in God. I live and move and have my being in God, and then let what happens out here. Well, that's that.